Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Asha Kuthari Chaudhary and I'm a professor in English at Guwahati University. We are doing a course on Indian writing in English, and the module we are looking at today is about memory and voice in English poetry written in India. We'll be looking at some 3 or 4 poets closely and some of their poetic creations. Among them are A.K. Ramanujan, Agha Shahid Ali, an older poet Derozio, and some others. Atipa Krishnaswamy Ramanujan was born into an Orthodox Hindu Brahmin family in 1929 in Mysore. Now, he received his education at Mysore and went off to the United States in 1962. So, we will have to consider one interesting factor about his location. It is part India and part the United States. So, it is part homegrown and part diasporic. His imagination, therefore, has to be shaped by this experience. Ramanujan's poetry is basically philosophical in outlook, as one finds a fusion of the contemporary scientific outlook with a peculiarly profound Hindu awareness of the spiritual and metaphysical in human nature. He consciously keeps himself away from elaborating sentiments. There is always a deliberate intent to keep a powerful inner turmoil under check. Now, the precise and tight structure of his poems gives the idea of a quiet tone that is further beautified by the use of minimal imagery. His published works include 1966 he has The Striders, in 1971 Relations, and selected poems come out in 1976 and Second Sight in 1986. Let us look at his poem Breaded Fish in detail. Ramanujan captures and gives expression here to the way he recoils at the sight of a breaded fish served to him by a lady who has prepared the dish especially for him. Nature is first represented by the fish meant for consumption, and later by an extended metaphor of the cobra and its devilish nature bent on action. The observation that Ramanujan's breaded fish is a recollection in emotionalized untranquility is worthy of study. And we find that the poet's emphasis is on one of his past experiences as having its bearings on the present. Now, the emotion we see is not tranquil, because neither the sight of the dead woman's body nor the look of the breaded fish generates feelings of rehabilitation. Both the sights trigger horror and continue to disgruntle the poet. Having tried to understand through specific poems the idea of play of memory and the poetic voice in Ramanujan's Breaded Fish and other poems that we have just looked at, try to also understand the fact that the man that we are looking at, the academic A.K. Ramanujan, has spent a whole career being a folklorist, having been one of the leading lights in terms of researching old myths, legends, folklores of India, particularly of the South. And having understood that, you need to relate that with the idea of an academic who is also a poet. And now bring to bear that huge span or range of experiences that he can bring to bear upon his poetic work. Moving on to Agha Shahid Ali, who was born in Kashmir in 1949 and also moved to the States later in his career. He is a poet who is greatly influenced by the likes of Mirza Ghalib, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, Begum Akhtar and Firdausi. One finds in him a true blend of Urdu and Persian sensibility expressed in the English language. It was in fact Shahid Ali who made an honest attempt to introduce the Urdu genre of the ghazal as a significant genre in English poetry. Agha Shahid Ali's constant preoccupation with the theme of dislocation and identity is best reflected in the poem called Learning Urdu. The prime significance of a language as not just a means of reciprocity between people or groups of people in the communication of ideas, but also in formulating the historicity of the socio-political climate that has resulted in the fragmentation of identity. The poem begins much in the manner of Shelley's Ozymandias, with the speakers meeting a, quote, victim of a continent broken, unquote, who comes from a district near Jammu. The idea of, quote, mincing the air, unquote, draws the reader's attention to the fragmentation that has violently uprooted the notion of amity or fraternity. The stranger friend of the speaker states that he could half remember the name of his village. He also says that his memory is dipped in blood. Kashmir, which has been the bone of contention since the partition between both India and Pakistan, tries to assert her independence from both these nations at the cost of human blood. The stranger in the poem feels demoralized in seeing no promising future. The poem is not a political statement on communalism. It is a probing on the idea of forming identity among communities. The stranger's observation that Ghalib has fallen into the abysmal pit of violence and that his poetry neither has the strength nor the power to draw the reader out of the abyss illustrates the intensity of this ongoing trauma. The speaker, however, concludes the poem with an optimistic note as he sees in Ghalib, and by extension in his poetry, the potential to remain in the state of perpetual flux. And that is important. Shahid Ali's own diasporic position is not just formulated along the register of memory. It is more often colored by it. Agha Shahid Ali's work, all the poems that we have read today, have served to remind us that, especially with this poet, the notion of a geographical terrain as it expresses itself within his poetry works completely in terms of Kashmir. The fact that he has moved to the United States after a certain span of his life and continues to write from there, you still have an understanding that all his poetry is informed by the memory of Kashmir, the history of Kashmir, the violence that is bred and born in that particular region out of specific historical reasons. And these all tend to give him a very uniquely geographical space that he makes his own and transforms into poetry. Form too, as we have spoken about when we are considering a poem like Ghazal, is something that comes straight from there and directly helps to shape his content as well as his form. Next, we will be looking at the works of Joyanta Mahapatra, who we have also had occasion to deal with in other modules. Mahapatra is born in Cuttack in Orissa in 1928, professor of physics at Ravenshaw College, with many volumes of poetry. He's a very prolific writer to his credit. The surreal world that permeates his poetry, along with the conceits and mind-boggling imagery, are representative of the qualitative merits of his poetic craft. He has earned the honor of being the first Indian English poet to receive the Sahitya Akademi Award for Relationship in 1981. It is an epic poem in 12 sections that meditates on Orissa's mythology and monuments. In the poem The Captive Heir on Chandipur on Sea, we have the enumeration of the ongoing struggle between human beings and nature. In a nostalgic vein, the poem relives the conflict, the labor, and effort of evolutionary processes and nature. The poem deliberately projects the dilemma of human beings who encounter the vicissitudes of life spread in a spatial kind of exactitude. The idea of personifying the sea in terms of a drunkard and the act of spitting out conch shells beautifies the panoramic essence of the seascape at Chandipur. The distant memory of the past struggle serves to be a cultural conglomeration of the people. And the memory here is not an individual memory, it is a cultural memory with all its underlying variations. The speaker also lends a personality to legends that mystify. In the poem called Ash, we have a powerful evocation of the memory of death, which is explicated by the choice of a distinctive image, ash. Mohapatra employs the contrast of the bliss that life guarantees and the incomprehensibility and fear of death. The poem is set in the manner of a funeral service that is reflected in the image of the ash after the cremation of the dead. It is elegiac in tone, but it is also a colorful portrayal of human emotions in graphic reality. The poem begins with the speakers holding the ashes of his father, which he thinks is all that is left of him. That he and his father are now distanced and are now worlds apart is proved by the sullen costumes of mortality that has finally got hold of his father. The poem is couched in a transcendentalist kind of a perspective. The speaker states that memory is a fragile thing that naturally fades and that everything in the past becomes eternally trapped in the past. The metaphorical idea of, quote, the dead man who licks my palms, unquote, is a grim reminder of the death of the father. The poem concludes with the Indian mythical dimensions of an afterlife. Having read some of the poems of Jayanta Mahapatra, I think we need to understand that, again, like Agha Shahid Ali, Mahapatra too is an interestingly spatial poet in the sense that his memories of the landscape of Chandipur, for instance, the cemetery at Balasore in another instance, the swamps that he talks about in another poem, are all memory poems. All of them help to define his poetic vision and in so many ways create the landscapes that are both interior monologues as well as an exteriorization of his own feelings upon the landscape. Let us now look at the work of Henry Louis Derozio, who, again born in 1809, is someone we have already considered in some of the previous modules. He is an older poet. How then does the same idea of memory or voice work in terms of a poet who was writing much before the other three that we have considered just now? At the age of 14, he left school and shifted to Bhagalpur, and this provided him the inspirational base for his poetry. In 1828, Derozio was appointed as a member of the English faculty in Hindu College, and this was a turning point for him. His great achievement is the poem, The Fakir of Jankira. The poem that we consider here is To My Native Land. Derozio's fiery patriotic spirit, coupled with his unflappable rhetorical ability, gets indelibly stamped in the texture of this poem. It is conceived in the form of an impassioned plea of the fabricated romantic notion of Mother India to free herself from the stultifying shackles of foreign domination. His concern here, primarily, is to contrast the qualitative standard of India as a deity in the past and the colonial condition. The poem unfolds with the speaker's lament explicated in his visualization of India as a country configured in terms of a deity. The reverence shown by the Indians is now a thing of remote past, as India is reduced to a mere reptile groveling in the dust. The imperial project of colonialism has a history that is replete with violence. It is this history that is offered as a subtext in this poem. The expression, "my fallen country," is a refrain in the poem that marks the speaker's coming to terms with the present reality of demystification as against his romantic fabrication of the country in terms of a political deity. The adjective "fallen" also suggests the regret of the speaker on witnessing the fading of the original glory of the country. The poem works at a powerful level and speaks of colonial plight. With Derosio's work, you will find that, as we have considered in the 2 or 3 poems that we have close read just now, the intent in terms of nationalism, the intent in terms of the rhetorical powers that he uses in terms of form, all of these again make a very specific kind of use of memories that are borrowed from India's past and help to shape the content of his work. The notion of memory and its interlinking with the idea of a poetic voice is what we have tried to be concerning ourselves with here in this module, and we have specifically looked at 4 poets: A.K. Ramanujan, Agha Shahid Ali, Jayanta Mahapatra, and Henry Derosio. Having looked at these 4 voices, we have noticed how memory has a play in all of their imagistic variations. The content and even the form is sometimes affected by the idea of memory. For example, how does a poem work in terms of a ghazal? And ghazal, recall how Vyat and Surrey in the olden Elizabethan times would go to the continent, borrow the sonnet, come back and write English sonnets. Here you have Agha Shahid Ali taking the form of the ghazal and using it to write in English. Now that becomes an extremely defining kind of a place that he would choose to place his voice and frame it thus. Now, memory also works in a very interesting way in not just these 4 poets. There are plenty others who carry the germ of a specific memory and move on in such a way so that that strand in some ways will define the way their poetic trajectories work throughout their careers and therefore tints their voice with that particular memory. For instance, we have Kamala Das, whose poems that reflect on her childhood, the grandmother's house, for example, or the image of the grandmother, the image of communities of women that have worked in tandem in her ancestral home, informs some of the latent desires and nostalgia that forms a pattern that we can actually read most of her poetry through. So also with K.K. Daruwala, you will find a poem like Hawk or Wolf. Both of these carry back and forth images of the past and pit them against the present. And you find that then you have a very interesting landscape that is built out of internalized memories that have been ingested and form a very interesting canvas when they are pitted against the present image. So this is the way in which much of the idea of memory helps to shape in the voices of many of the Indian poets that we've been looking at. The other important thing that we must note is that since we are talking about Indian poetry in English, we must also understand that the language itself sometimes might have to struggle a great deal to find that particular expression or poetic voice. How does the Indian mind, the Indian memory, take hold of a different language, the colonial residue, and work with that particular voice? And how does that shape the terrain of all their corpuses? So the questions that we must also remember to ask sometimes is, how does memory play the role of the agent of cultural retrieval? That is an important question. I also think that one should think in terms of how the speaker will no longer find any solace or plenitude only in the memory. It has to be grabbed and used in tandem with the present to find a certain kind of individuality as well as self-expression.